In our nugget regarding building a lab concepts, we talked about connecting virtual machines to specific virtual networks. The question might be, how easy is that to configure inside of VMware Workstation? And the answer is, it's a piece of cake. So let's imagine that this is the host computer that's going to be running VMware Workstation, which is acting as our hypervisor, and maybe this is Bob's PC. And it's connected to a physical network, which it could also be connected to a wireless network. It's going to be the same concept here. As part of VMware Workstation, there's going to be multiple VMnets. Now, whenever we see the concept or the word VMnet, we can think to ourselves, let's say logical network. So VMnet 1, VMnet 2, VMnet 3, etc. Each of those represent a different logical network space, very similar to the concept of a VLAN, a separate network. And these VMnets only exist logically as part of VMware Workstation. Now, here's the cool part, how we can leverage those. When we deploy a virtual machine, as part of the configuration for that virtual machine, we can associate that virtual machine with a VMnet. So if we have one network adapter in the virtual machine, we could associate it, for example, with VMnet 1. And then as part of being in VMnet 1, we could associate VMnet 1 with, for example, the 10.1.1.0 network, or any other IP addressing scheme that we want to choose to associate with VMnet 1. And maybe VMnet 2 is the 10.2.2.0 network. Again, it's up to us with what IP addresses we use on the machines that are connected to the respective VMnets. Now, for the physical network down here is 192.168.1.0, and maybe this is also VLAN 10. From the physical network's perspective, we would have the option of bridging the network adapter on the VM over to that physical network. Or if we had a VMnet, let's take VMnet 0, and we had configured VMnet 0 to be bridged to this physical network interface card, then if we associate the VM with VMnet 0, it's like algebra in high school. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. And how that applies here is that if this VM is associated with VMnet 0, and VMnet 0 is associated to be bridged with this physical network interface card, effectively this VM is on that same network, the 192.168.1 in our case. And one other item I'd like to share with you before we demo this is, what if we wanted Bob's PC to also take part in and play a role on this 10.1.1 network? One of the options we have when we work with the networking portion of VMware Workstation is to configure the host computer to have a logical virtual network interface card on one of these VMnets. So we could configure VMnet 1 to represent the 10.1.1 network, and if we check the box that says we want Bob's PC to also be present and participate on that network, we could check that box, and Bob's PC would be given an IP address on that 10.1.1 network as part of VMnet 1. We also have an option of being a DHCP server on a VMnet if we choose to, and those are in the controls of VMware Workstation, which we're going to look at right now. So here on Bob's machine, I've launched VMware Workstation just to verify what version we're running. I'm going to click on Help and go to About VMware Workstation from the dropdown. And what this reveals is that we're running VMware Workstation 12 Pro version 12.1. And if you're running version 11 or version 10 of VMware Workstation, it's going to be very similar in its configuration. Now, to configure the networking, the VMnets inside of VMware Workstation, we're going to go up here to Edit. We're going to click on Edit, and then from the drop-down, we're going to select the Virtual Network Editor. And here we can view the settings for the virtual networking, and if we want to change the settings, we need to click on this little button right here, which will allow us to change the settings. So we'll click on the Change Settings button right here. I have Windows User Account Control saying, are you sure you want to allow this to happen? I'm going to click on Yes. And now with VMnet 0 highlighted, it's showing me that it's currently bridged to my network interface card. So down here, because the radio button for bridged is selected, also from this drop down, if I have multiple network interface cards, I can control which network interface card on the host computer, Bob's PC, that VMnet 0 is currently being bridged to. So I've got a pluggable network interface adapter that goes in a USB port, and I've also got the one that was built into the motherboard on the host computer that I'm using. So next, let's click on VMnet 1. And in my current configuration, it's configured as a host-only network. It's a logical network that's being created on this host that's running VMware Workstation. And if we had 3 virtual machines, and each of the virtual machines were connected logically to VMnet 1, they could all talk to each other on that network. I've also identified what the subnet address range is going to be for that network. And the reason that's important is if we're going to also add a network interface card from Bob's PC, the host computer, by clicking this checkbox right here, connect a host virtual adapter to this network, and that would give this computer the IP address of 10.1.1.1 on the 10.1.1 network. And if we wanted VMware Workstation to be a DHCP server to hand out IP addresses, we could click this checkbox and say use local DHCP service to hand out IP addresses to virtual machines. And another option is if we wanted to set up network address translation, we could click this radio button, and that would allow VMware Workstation to act as a router to route the packets from the 10.1.1 subnetwork out to the physical network that it's connected to on its other interface. And then here's VMnet 2, which is also just another logical network. And if we wanted to add a new network, we can click on Add Network. It's going to recommend VMnet 3 as our next logical number. We can click on OK. It came up with some wacky address space it wants to use. If we wanted that to be 10.3.3.0, we could. And then we could decide whether or not we want to be a DHCP server for that logical network and whether or not we want to connect a network interface card from the host computer, Bob's PC, also to that network, which would be important if we want direct communication from this host computer to that VMnet, or rather I should say to the devices in that VMnet. So if you need that interface, you check that box. If you don't, you can deselect it, and I'm going to click on Apply. Now, the lab that we're going to build together as part of these nuggets, I'm going to connect all my virtual machines directly to my physical/wireless network here in my home office. So to do that, I could associate the network interface cards of the virtual machines either with VMnet 0, and that would do it because it's bridged to my Ethernet card, or there's another option that says please bridge the network interface card directly to the physical interface, and that would also have the same logical function. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK here. And to demonstrate the connectivity, let's go to one of my virtual machines that I already have in place. Here's a Windows 8 machine, a virtual machine. So by clicking on this virtual machine here, it has the settings. And what we're focused on here is networking. So this shows that this virtual machine, its network adapter is connected to VMnet 2. If we wanted to change that, we could go ahead and simply right-click on this virtual machine. From the drop-down, we'll go ahead and select Settings down here near the bottom. And then for the network adapter, we would highlight that. And here's where you and I would specify where we want the virtual network interface card on that virtual machine, where we want that to connect. If we want it to connect to VMnet 1, we would select VMnet 1 from the dropdown. If we wanted to connect it to VMnet 0, we'd click on or select VMnet 0 from the dropdown. And in our case, in my current topology, VMnet 0 is bridged to my Ethernet adapter. And if the goal for you and I is to bridge this virtual machine's network card to our physical machine's network interface card, another way of doing that exact same logic is by clicking on the bridged option here, which says connect directly to the physical network. And then I usually replicate the physical network connection state to the virtual machine. And one little interesting thing, see how we made that change here, but over here it still shows VMnet 2. If we click on something else, for example, let's click on processors, that refreshes the screen, and now it shows that it's bridged. And if you have multiple network interface cards and you want to make sure you're bridging it to the right network interface card, it might be a good idea to go ahead and specify VMnet 0, which is bridged over to a specific network interface card, and that way you don't have to guess about which network it's connected to. So we'll say custom VMnet 0, and then we'll click over here somewhere else once more so it refreshes. And now once we click on OK, and then we start up that virtual machine is now logically connected to the same network that the host computer, in our example, Bob's computer, is connected. So I'm going to leave that change and click on OK. In this nugget, we've discussed and demonstrated how to work with VMware Workstation to control the networking and to associate which network a virtual machine is connected to. This will become really important as we start building virtual machines, which we'll do in our very next nugget. So thanks for joining me. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.